Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Shaima here, and our today's topic is on speech and aphasia. So, basically, what do you mean by speech or language? It's used for communication, and communication is it's a necessity among all the living organisms. Let it be animals, birds, insects, etc., which communicate in different ways. Among humans, you see that speech is the most effective communication system, and this is also called the language. Speech is basically a systematic, articulated pattern of sounds made to express the thoughts or even ideas in the form of either verbal or written words. Now, this is a function basically of higher centers which are located in the cerebral cortex of the dominant hemisphere and some subcortical types. Now, if you look at speech, there are three types of speech which are identified. You have the spoken speech, you have the written speech, and the reading. Now, spoken speech is where the various ideas are expressed verbally, and written speech is when you are expressing ideas by written words, and reading speech is when written symbols are used to verbally express your ideas. Now, what you mean by aphasia is the speech disorders, any kind of speech disorders which can be due to any clinical manifestations or because of any type of lesions depending upon the anatomic location of the lesions or any kind of etiology, etc. You can have many disorders associated with speech which you call as aphasia. So that's generally about speech. So now, before we actually really move into the details of speech, you need to know a little about the brain, because I've told you that speech is a higher function, or basically it's a function of the higher centers of the brain, especially the cerebral cortex of the dominant hemisphere and some subcortical centers too. So you need to really know a little about the different hemispheres and little aspects of the left and the right hemisphere, the dominant hemisphere. So I'll just brief upon that. So you know that the brain is divided into two hemispheres. You have the left and the right hemisphere, and the two hemispheres are connected by a bundle of nerve fibers which you call as the corpus callosum. You can see that very clearly in the picture. Now you need to know a few terminologies. You need to be thorough with the terminologies, because as I move forward with the slides of speech, I would be using these terms. So you need to know what exactly they mean. So what do you mean by contralateral control? Now each hemisphere of the brain controls the opposite side of the body. So left hemisphere, which you call as the categorical or the dominant hemisphere, it controls the right side, and the right hemisphere controls the left side, and the right hemisphere you call it as a representational area or the hemisphere. So please keep that in mind. The left hemisphere is the categorical or the dominant hemisphere, and when I use the term representational area, I am referring to the right hemisphere. Now there's another term you need to be familiarized with, which is the brain lateralization. The brain is asymmetrical, isn't it? So that each hemisphere is specialized for certain specific cognitive functions. So that's why a little more about the lateralization of the brain. Human body is generally asymmetrical with you have heart, liver, the use of limbs, etc. So the whole body functions in an asymmetrical way. Now functions of the brain becomes lateralized because the body is asymmetrical. Each hemisphere is specialized for particular ways of working. Now split brain patients are a good example of lateralization of the language functions. Now a little more into the lateralization of brain. The left hemisphere, I told you call it as the categorical or the dominant part of the brain. Now the main function of the left hemisphere is analytical processing, where all different kinds of informations are analyzed. Language and speech sounds are also a function. Mathematics, the temporal relations, and intellectual reasoning, all these are taken care of by the categorical or the dominant part, which is the left hemisphere. Now when you look at the right hemisphere, which I refer to as the representational part, Its main function is in holistic processing. Now, what do you mean by holistic processing? Recognizing the overall patterns. Example, one very good example for this overall recognizing overall patterns is face recognition. Second function is non-speech sounds. Music, if the person is the musically naive individuals will have this property, which is a characteristic of the right hemisphere or the representational hemisphere. Visual and spatial relations, and also emotional reactions are a function of the representational area of the brain, which is the right hemisphere. Now, let's see the lateralization of functions. Let's compare with the left and the right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is very specific for sequential analysis, which include problem solving and language, and the right hemisphere, it's simultaneous analysis, synthetic analysis, visual spatial skills like cognitive maps, personal space, facial recognition drawing, emotional functions like recognition of emotions, expressing emotions, music if the person has been exposed to music. So this is basically a comparison of the right and the left hemisphere when it comes to lateralization functions. Now, left hemisphere, which takes care of language. Aphasia, I told you, any speech deficit or any language deficit. It can be due to a bullet injury, a stroke, any kind of infection. All this can lead to aphasia. And aphasia almost always is caused by left hemisphere damage. So please remember that language or speech is a function of the left hemisphere. You call left hemisphere as a categorical or the dominant hemisphere, and an injury to that part, it could be a bullet injury, a stroke, any kind of infection, all this would cause a disorder. There would be a speech or the language disorder, which you refer to as aphasia, which is commonly due to the damage of the left hemisphere of the brain. Now we move into speech. Sorry. So speech, I've already told you. There are three types of speech. You have the spoken speech, the written speech, and the reading speech. Now, basically speech is a process, by which a person can communicate with others in a very effective way. So now for a person to speak or the skill of language, basically you should have a sensory input, and then something called as at the center an analyzing and an interpretation unit, and the third part is the motor output, which involves vocalization. So this is how the three steps of speech. You have sensory unit, analysis and interpretation unit, motor output involving vocalization. Now I think you need to know a little more on this, what a sensory input is. So what this basically means is a speech development, or for a person to speak, these three requirements are there: sensory inputs, analyzing and interpretation unit, and also a motor output unit. Now what do you mean by a sensory input? Basically sensory input comprises of the receptor and also the primary auditory, visual and the somatosensory areas. Now what do? They feed the information to the analyzing unit, which is going to interpret it now. Is that clear? So the sensory input, it consists of receptors and also the primary auditory, visual and somatosensory areas, and all of these together, the receptors, the primary auditory, visual and the sensory areas, they would actually send impulse to the analyzing and the interpretation unit. Now what does this analyzing and interpretation unit do? What it does is, whatever information it has received through the sensory system or the sensory input, it will analyze it, and it will analyze its significance, or it basically interprets the significance. It analyzes the inputs and it will interpret the significance, and appropriate sequence of words will be initiated. Now the visual and the auditory association areas, the angular gyrus, the Wernicke's area and hand skill areas participate in this process. So which now you need to remember, sensory input, it is the centers involved are, you have the receptors, the primary auditory, visual and the somatosensory areas. Now whatever impulses come from these areas, from these areas, the inputs are reaching the visual and the auditory association areas, angular gyrus, Wernicke's area, and hand skill areas. All of them, what they do is they'll analyze the information which has come from the sensory input, and they'll try to interpret, the meaning of that impulse and try to make it into a speech. Now the last one, you have the motor output involving vocalization. Now what do you mean by, I think more simple would be you can put it as motor output unit. Now the motor area is basically the Broca's area, the premotor area and the motor area. Now all of them, they control the muscles of vocalization and writing. And Broca's area, premotor area and the motor area, which you call, together you call them as the motor output area. They actually participate in verbal speech, reading and writing. Cerebellum and the basal ganglia also is a part of the motor output unit. So sensory input areas were receptors, primary auditory, visual and somatosensory area. Analyzing interpretation areas were the visual and the auditory association areas, angular gyrus, Wernicke's area and the hand skill areas. The motor output units were Broca's area, premotor area, motor area, cerebellum and basal ganglia. So these are the centers. Input starts from the sensory input, analyzed and interpreted by those centers which I have already mentioned, and finally the motor output unit, which would control the muscles of vocalization and writing, and finally the speech is complete. The person is able to write, read or speak. So now we need to go a little more into, I've already mentioned you the areas, isn't it? What the sensory input areas were, what the analyzing and interpretation areas were, and what were the motor output areas. Now you need to know a little more about all that. The Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, isn't it? Broca's area was a motor output area. And where did you come across the Wernicke's area? Same under that. So Broca's area, which is area number 44, it's basically located in the lower frontal operculum, which is in the inferior frontal gyrus in the dominant hemisphere. Left hemisphere normally is the dominant hemisphere in a right-handed person. So that's the location of the Broca's area, which is area number 44. And Broca's area, or area number 44, it's concerned with vocal speech. Please keep that in mind. Now Wernicke's area, which is area number 22, it is situated in the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus, and this is a sensory speech area for the reception and comprehension of spoken words. I think you need to be really thorough with these areas, where they are located and what exactly they do when it comes to speech. So you can see the picture there. You can see the Broca's area, area number 44, and Wernicke's area, area number 22 in the left hemisphere, dominant left hemisphere, when the person is a right-handed person. Now the cortical areas of speech, you have the angular area, that's the third one. Broca's and Wernicke's is over. That is area number 39, and this angular gyrus is situated just behind the Wernicke's area. Now this area is concerned with the reception of written words. That means, what I mean is reading, and the initial processing of the visual language. That's a function of the angular gyrus. Now you can see the centers very clearly mentioned there. These are the speech centers, and all these areas I have mentioned earlier was only the Broca's area, the Wernicke's area and the angular gyrus. You have still more areas which are involved in the language. You have the one second, let me just go to the, okay, we go to pathways. So here you have Broca's area. Please identify in the picture. Yeah, you can see Broca's area, yellow color marked one, which is area number 44 and 45. I just repeat their location. They are basically located in the inferior frontal gyrus in front of the premotor area, which is above the sylvian fissure. Now this is concerned with proper planning of speech. Now second, you have the Wernicke's area, area number 22. It's basically the posterior most part of area number 22 of the superior temporal gyrus. And this Wernicke's area, area number 22, is concerned with comprehension and word selection. Now, next you have Broca's is over, Wernicke's is over, then you have the angular gyrus. You can see in the picture the green color one, area number 39, and this is concerned with comprehension and also the initial processing of the written words. Now, you have few more centers present. You have the auditory association area, area number 42. This auditory association area or the area number 42, it interprets the meaning of sounds, that is reaching area number 41. Then you have the visual association area, that is area number 18 and 19. And this area number 18 and 19 interprets the meaning of the various symbols that reach the primary visual area. Now the last one, you have an area, I don't think it's there in the picture, it's called as a hand skilled area, which I've already mentioned, when I spoke about the three speech development. It requires sensory input, analyzing and interpretation unit, and the motor output unit. I've mentioned about the hand skilled area. Now this hand skilled area is an area which is located in the premotor area just anterior to the hand representation area in the primary motor cortex. This is concerned with proper planning of the writing movement, and you also call this area as the motor writing center or the Exner's area. So this Exner's area or the motor writing area is same as the hand skilled area, which is actually present in the primary motor cortex, and it's involved in the proper planning of the writing work. Now the other areas which are concerned with speech are, you have the insula, which is a grey matter which is tucked inside the sylvian fissure. Then you have the supplementary motor area, which is located in the medial surface of the hemisphere in area number 6. Then you have the cingulate gyrus, which is a grey matter on the medial side and the frontal lobe just above the corpus callosum. And then you have area number 20, 21 and 38 of the temporal lobe, cerebellum and the basal ganglia. Now all these structures have got a very important role in bringing about a smooth and effective speech. So totally speech centers, I have told about 11 of them. Auditory association area, visual association area, Wernicke's area, angular gyrus, Broca's area, hand skilled area, which are the major speech centers. That means I've told 6 of them, and now you have 4 more other smaller areas, which was insula, supplementary motor area, singular gyrus, area number 20, 21, 28 of the temporal lobe, cerebellum and basal ganglia. I think that is put as 1 point. Don't put it as area number 20 as 1 point, 21 as 138. No. Please put this as a last point, area number 20, 21 and 38 of temporal lobe, cerebellum and basal ganglia. Now all these structures, 6 plus 4, together need to function very effectively to bring about a smooth and effective speech. Now let's come to the second next part. Now you have the principal pathways of communication. So basically what I mean, can you see the pathways? So I would be taking you all through 2 pathways. So here the first is the speech pathway. Okay, and the second one will be the written speech pathway. Okay, so 2 you all need to know thoroughly, and that's one, the visual pathway is, the speech pathway is what is shown in this figure here, where you can see the Broca's area is getting connected to the Wernicke's area. So let me tell you what the speech pathway is. So you already know that the expression of speech, it can be through either orally, the speech pathway, or the written speech. So let's see first what the speech pathway is. The various steps that are involved in communication through speech is in response to hearing, isn't it? So once the person hears something, the communication. So what happens first is, number 1 is, it is received, or the reception of sound signals by the primary auditory area, number 41. So I think what I have put it in 5 points. Before that, I think the first point what you need to mention is the various steps that are involved in communication through speech in response to hearing R. You put it like that and then you put this 5 to 8 points. So then number 1 is the sound is received by the primary auditory area number 41. Number 2 is interpretation of words in the Wernicke's area number 22. Number 3 is Wernicke's area decides the choice and sequence of words to be spoken. Number 4, this information is transmitted from the Wernicke's area to the Broca's area via the arcuate fasciculus. That is what you see here. The information is transmitted from the Wernicke's area to the Broca's area via the arcuate fasciculus. That is what you see in the picture here. Now the 5th point is, what happens is the Broca's area is activated for word formation, area number 45 and 44. Next is Broca's area in turn transmits appropriate signals to motor cortex that controls speech muscles 4 and 6. And finally, the 7th point, I think you can put it as speech. So that is basically, so when all the 6 points happen, 7th we result in speech, or the person is able to speak. So you have the figure also there. Now the second one here, my slide tells it as visual origin part of the speech or reading a book. So the pathway, the steps involved in reading are for a person to see. You very naturally, or effortlessly you'll take a book, open it and start reading. So please understand, for you to read something, the pathway involved is you look at a book. So we start point number 1, visual impulses reach the primary visual area number 17. Number 2, impulses reach angular gyrus, area number 39, through areas 18 and 19. Number 3, impulses reach Wernicke's area 22, which is interpreting the meaning of words. Number 4, information reaches Broca's area 45 and 44. Number 5, Broca's area feeds to the motor cortex 4 and 6. And finally, number 6, muscles of speech are activated. So that is basically the written speech or the visual origin, or this is how you read a book. So 6 points. The other one, I think the first one, the speech pathway, I put it in 7 points. Now this you need to know. Now repeating a written word. Okay, when you're speaking a written word, how does the impulse go? Number 1, I think if you can just study these 4 to 5 points, it's very clearly represented also in the figure here. So you can see number 1, can you see in the figure, primary visual cortex, from there how it goes to 2, which is the angular gyrus, then it goes to 3, the Broca's area, then number 4 again Broca's area, and how the whole process of speech happens, or when a written word is read and he is able to speak. Visual cortex number 1 basically analyzes the image and transmits the information about the image to the angular gyrus number 2, green color, you can see that. The angular gyrus is decoding the image information to recognize the word and associate this visual form with the spoken form in the Wernicke's area. Now at 3, information about the word is transmitted via the arcuate fasciculus to the Broca's area. And there you have then 4, the Broca's area, what does it do? It formulates a motor plan to say the appropriate word and transmits that plan to motor cortex, which needs to be implemented. Now what is important here is, if there is a lesion of the angular gyrus, the green color one, which disrupts the flow of information from the primary visual cortex, and what happens is the person will have great difficulty in saying words as he has seen but no words was heard. This is a very interesting actually picture, how you repeat a written word, you see a word. See, for example, my slide heading is repeating a written word. For me to be able to read it, all these 4 things should happen. So the speech and learning, I personally feel, it's a very interesting part. So I think aphasia is there. Aphasia. I think I'm just thinking whether I should do it today or take it to the next class. I think I'll just finish it off. So aphasia, you know that it's the disorders or abnormality with speech. So any abnormality of language functions which are due to any defects of vision or hearing, or it can be even due to motor paralysis, because by now you know that for you to speak, visual impulse should be strong, auditory input should be strong, or also an intact actively working motor system. So if there is any defect with the vision, hearing, or with the motor system, aphasia would be and basically you call it is caused by lesion in the categorical hemisphere. What do you mean by categorical hemisphere? The left hemisphere is referred to as the categorical hemisphere, which is normally in a right-handed person. The left dominant part which controls language is the left cerebral hemisphere, or it can be thrombosis of the cerebral blood vessels. Now the causes of aphasia are you have cerebral thrombosis, cerebral infarction, injury to the brain during accidents, inadequate blood flow to the parts of the brain due to vascular changes, any tumors of the brain, or it can be even a congenital origin. Now what happens is, if any of these conditions happen, any one of them, from this 1 to 6, you can see that the different aspects of speech, like speech production, speech comprehension, writing, reading, all these components of the speech are affected if any of these, one among the 6 conditions, persists in a person. Now, how do you classify aphasia? For aphasia is classified as, you have the fluent aphasia, non-fluent aphasia, and the global aphasia. Now, what do you mean by non-fluent aphasia? Non-fluent aphasia is also called as a Broca's aphasia, and in that particular non-fluent aphasia, there is a lesion in the Broca's area, and you call it as a motor aphasia. The features are, the person speaks very slowly, and he uses only 2-3 words to express the whole range of meaning and emotion. He speaks very minimal. Now here you can see in the picture the Broca's aphasia, where there is damage to the motor images. Language comprehension skills are relatively preserved. It's typically observed in patients with damage to left inferior prefrontal cortex. Now you have the fluent aphasia, which is also called as the Wernicke's aphasia. It is also called as sensory aphasia, and in this particular type of aphasia, the lesion is with area number 22, which is the Wernicke's area. Now the feature of fluent aphasia is just opposite to what we mentioned, the first aphasia. Here he talks excessively, full of jargons and neologisms that make little sense. What do you mean by jargons? Jargons is basically, special words or terms which is used particularly in a profession or a group of people, which normally the other people cannot understand. So that is what you mean by jargons. And what you mean by neologisms is, you are trying to coin a new word to express a particular feeling or thing. That is again, so both jargons and neologisms, the people around you who are not exposed to that may not understand. So fluent aphasia, the conversation of a person will have a lot of jargons and neologisms. He talks excessively, but finally at the end, the person who is listening is not able to understand what this person is trying to communicate. So you have the Wernicke's aphasia there, a picture for that. Now the neologisms, speech appears to have no information content, so you call it as, it's a fluent nonsense. He'll be speaking very fluently, but you won't understand anything. So that's why you call it as a fluent nonsense. Now preserved function words, impaired content words, comprehension is impaired. Even simple sentences not well understood, because there are a lot of jargons and neologisms associated with left temporal lobe damage. Now you have the global aphasia, which is the complete aphasia. Now this global aphasia is the severe form of aphasia, and the lesion is widespread, and it affects more number of speech areas. Affecting it, it expresses the receptive area, it expresses functional area. So what happens basically for a patient with global aphasia is, the patient cannot read, he cannot repeat, and he has got very poor auditory comprehension. Now the speech output is non-fluent, and it's very, very minimal when you talk about the global aphasia. Now then you have the conduction aphasia when there is a lesion with area number 40, 41, 42. The features are the patient with conduction aphasia cannot put parts of words together. Now then you have the anomic aphasia where there is a lesion with area number 39, which is angular gyrus, and the features are he has got a lot of trouble in understanding written languages or pictures. But auditorily recognizing speech is very easy for him. Now then you have the auditory receptive aphasia, or in other words, a simple word, we call it as a word deafness, and the features are the person is unable to comprehend spoken word. He won't be able to repeat, write, or even dictate a word or a sentence. The auditory function is normal here, and the lesion is with the temporal lobe when it comes to auditory receptive aphasia. Then you have the visual receptive aphasia, which is also called as the word blindness, and the features are the person or the patient has inability to comprehend the meaning of written words. Vision is normal. He can see the words. He can even copy it. But he won't be able to understand the meaning of the words what he see. And lesion here in visual receptive aphasia or the word blindness is due to a lesion in the angular gyrus. Now here this chart shows you all different types of aphasias, characteristic response of a patient with lesions in various areas when they are shown a picture of the chair. That means when a patient who comes to a clinician, a chair is shown to him and he is asked to identify what it is. So depending on how he analyzes the chair, the words he tells, the way he writes, the clinician is able to categorize the patient into the different types of aphasias. It's a very interesting chart. So you just like if it's a non-fluent aphasia or the Broca's area, if you show him a chair and ask him to name it, instead of chair, he tell it as Zair. Now, if it is a Wernicke's area aphasia or the fluent aphasia, when you show him a chair, he would tell it as stool or cause. Now, this word cause is basically, a neologism, where, he's trying to coin his own word. No one would be able to understand that, by the word cause, he's trying to mention about a chair. Now, when it comes to the fluent aphasia or the conduction aphasia, where area number 40, 41 and 42 is involved, you show him a chair, he'll pronounce it as flare, swear, tear. This is how, he would pronounce it. Now then you have the last one, you have the anomic, where the angular gyrus is affected. You have the anomic aphasia, where, you ask him, show him a chair and ask him to identify it. He would immediately tell it as, I know what it is, I have a lot of them. This is what his response would be. So this is actually a very interesting slide. And if you are able to remember the different types of aphasias with this particular example of a clinician showing the chair, I think you would never forget the difference. Now, few more slides on basically the disorders of speech. So first one, you have the dysarthria. So dysarthria is basically difficulty in proper pronunciation of words, and this is seen in cerebellar, basal ganglia and other motor area disorders. So basically area number 4, 6 and 8 are involved in dysarthria. Now there is no involvement of the higher functions of the speech, and it occurs in disorders of muscles of speech, the nerve supplying them, or the involvement of bulbar nuclei or pyramidal tracts. Now in bulbar paralysis, there is slurring of speech. In cerebellar lesion, there is both slurring and scanning of speech. In Parkinsonism, there is slurring, but it is going to be very monotonous. So I think there we end with important speech disorders. I think I told you dysarthria, right? It will be good if you can remember one more, which is the scanning speech. Scanning speech is, in this defect, basically what happens is lengthy words are broken into individual syllables. For example, the word stereognosis, if you ask a patient with scanning speech to pronounce the word stereognosis, he would split it. He would tell it as rio, gnosis, and this is normally seen in cerebellar lesions. Now the third disorder of speech, mutism. Mutism is, the condition is very sincere to the word what we use. There is complete absence of speech, and this is normally seen when there is a lesion with the cingulate gyrus. And the last one, the disorders of speech, you can put it as aphasia. In this, both sensory and the motor components are normal, but the lesion appears to be in the associated areas which is responsible for integrating activity. If dysarthria is asked as a 3 marker, it is more than enough if you just mention these points. But if you get a 3 marker as speech disorders, so it will be good if you start with dysarthria. I think you can put these 4 points: dysarthria, then you put scanning speech, mutism, and put the 4th one as aphasia. Then I think you would get the full 3 marks. So I think that's with speech and aphasia. Thanks for listening. Please be very thorough with this portion. It's a very often asked 5 marker or a 3 marker. So please make your lecture notes and study well. Thank you guys for listening. Bye.